Apex released on February the 4th, 2019. But here's something interesting. This build of Apex I have right here was made before Apex released. And when we check in the files, we can tell. And this build reveals loads of legend abilities that we theorized about at one point, but we weren't able to see because Respawn removed a lot of the traces from the files. Well, in this build of Apex, they didn't, so we can finally reconstruct some of these abilities. This build of Apex was compiled on the 15th of January 2019, before the game released, so it has some pre-release stuff in it, and oh my god, some of it is shocking. For example, I started data mining it, checked the user interface files, and found this. Oh my god, this is what Lifeline looked like at one point. She looked so weird. I'm not sure if this is because we know what Lifeline looks like now, but the fact that Respawn even had her looking like this at one point scares me, quite frankly. And once again, this build was only compiled a month before Apex came out, so Lifeline's appearance must have been a bit of a last minute change. Also, in some areas we can see unfinished parts like this unfinished legend lineup, and also a non-bold Wraith skin. Yes, the bold Wraith skin used to have a little bit of hair. Along with this, we can see a very early version of World's Edge, which is strange because it wasn't set to release until 3 seasons after Apex's release. We can see Epicenter looks very different, Fragrant actually looks kind of the same, although it seems streamer building was originally going to be a car park, judging by this ramp here, and it seems the map Skybox was originally going to have a lot more development and buildings in it, which would have been pretty strange. This is where it gets a bit crazy though, because when we start looking through the models in this build, we can find this model, and you may think this looks like Octane, and it's because it is. This is a very early version of Octane. For the last 5 years, the only proof of this model's existence we had was this image here found in the user interface files very early in Apex's life. But nobody ever got their hands on the model until recently when they found this build, which is insane. It's insane that we finally have this model, and the fact that we can see the whole thing, and the fact that we can see the earliest version of Octane we know in its full form is great. This is Apex history that needs to be preserved. Along with this, Cafe FPS found Octane's old abilities, and trust me, they're not what you think. His tactical was originally called Rage Mode, and its description read, enter a rage where you stim and take 50% reduced damage, but you can only perform melee leap attacks. So yeah, this sounds incredibly situational and dumb, and I think the Octane we have today is absolutely fantastic. Looking deeper into these same files, we can find this gun shield called Jericho Gun Shield, and this is another ability that Respawn were going to add at one point, and we can get it functioning in-game again. The rest of the abilities that I'm going to show you were re-added into Apex by Cafe FPS. He made them as close to what they looks like in development, so this is what Respawn would have been seeing when they were developing Legends. Thank you, Cafe. But let's start with Jericho, because they have 2 abilities, the Javelin and the Riot Shield. I think this is what Jericho was originally going to look like, because this seems to be the only legend in the files with a user interface that has a Riot Shield on it. A lot of people originally thought this was concept art for Rampart, but maybe we were wrong. First of all, this is the Riot Shield in action. This is what Respawn were seeing when they were testing the game. This is fantastic stuff. The Riot Shield disables your ability to shoot, it disables your ability to sprint, and only protects you from the direction where the Riot Shield is facing. And this is the first person view, and this is the third person view. Obviously, both of these were in very early development and probably never got very far, considering we never got these abilities. Respawn scrapped them. Jericho also has an ability called the Maelstrom Javelin, and essentially it's a javelin that you can throw that seems to give off a stun effect. I assume this would be like an arc star set in place, where if an enemy goes near it, they get disorientated, slowed down, and maybe drained of their health a bit. This is what the ability placeholder looks like. Very interesting stuff, and the visual clutter when you go near this is insane. I know this definitely wasn't finalized, but if Respawn added this today, people would just stop playing the game immediately. So that would have been Jericho before they got scrapped. Jericho seemed like a very crowd control based legend, but we have some very cool abilities that Respawn scrapped coming up as well, like Prophet's ability. This ability was repurposed in Vantage's season as Vantage's passive, but this is what it looked like in season 1 when it was intended for the legend Prophet. Essentially, if you had a line of sight of a legend, it would give you information about them, aka their health and stuff. You've seen it with Vantage, but Respawn were testing this way back in the day, and this is what it looks like, fully recreated. It seems this is what Prophet would have looked like, so this is the legend that would have gone with the ability, and considering they look quite ethereal, maybe the spotter sight was more of like a mind reader reading thing. Nomad is the next legend we were able to reconstruct abilities for, and Nomad was going to have an ability called a loot compass, and it does simply that. It shows you where the nearest rare loot is. It seems to prioritize purple loot or legendary loot, and basically if you're within around 30 meters of the loot, it will point you towards it. It doesn't have any pointers to the verticality, so if you're standing above or below the loot, it won't really tell you, it will just say you're there. But this is a very cool ability that Respawn were testing, and this is what it looks like fully reconstructed thanks to this very early build of Apex that we got our hands on. This is great to see. This is Apex history. There was also an ability in the files that Cafe recreated called Ground Slam, and this is it. Essentially, it's what it is, a ground slam. We got a very similar thing to this when the Final Fantasy sword came as a weapon to Apex and you could slam it into the ground and cause damage. This ground slam ability is very OP, it wasn't very tuned, but it's very fun to use. And essentially, wherever you point your mouse and activate your ability at, your character will fly towards the area, making it a very powerful attack. If Respawn were gonna add this to a legend, I would imagine they would have had rockets on the back like Reinhardt so they could do these types of maneuvers. Or hey, maybe Respawn were actually serious about Forge being a legend at one point and he wasn't just an elaborate prank. The next ability that was salvaged from this build was Rampart's original cover wall. All the way back in Season 0, before the game even released, Respawn were working on Rampart and her tactical, and this is what it originally looked like. Originally, she was allowed to put down a lot of walls, and they could be healed simply by standing near them. They had a lot of health, and this was clearly a very early in development version of this ability, but it's cool to play with, and you can build yourself a little fortified castle. It's interesting to think that Respawn were planning Rampart's abilities before Apex came out, and it's interesting how little they changed. Okay, they're not sandbags anymore, but the only thing that really changed is the amount you can put down and the fact that they can't be repaired by having someone stand near them anymore. In these files as well, Cafe was able to find the abilities of a legend called Husaria and recreate them, and now we have this. First of all, an ability called Concussive Breach, which will blow open doors and also damage people behind walls that the Concussive Breach is placed on. This is a very powerful ability, but also it's gonna screw you over if you're not prepared for it. It seems unfair, but it is fun. Weirdly enough, if you place it on a door, it won't break the door, it will just open it. There was also an ability for her called a shotgun kick, which would transform all her melees into a kick, and every time you kicked a door or an enemy, it would shoot them with shotgun ammo, provided you had the said ammo in your inventory. And they had a final ability, which was a flashbang. I'm sure you all know what a flashbang is. Now, all of the abilities that I just showed you belonged to legends in development, but there were a few abilities that Respawn were working on who don't belong to a legend, like the dodge roll ability. And it's pretty much as simple as it sounds. It allows you to dodge roll, it gives you a little speed boost, and also lowers your profile while you roll. Essentially, it's the good old Dark Souls roll. Respawn were working on another ability called Sonic Shout, which is awesome. You can hit enemies, of course, with this, and it will shoot them back, but you can also rocket jump with the Sonic Shout ability. This would be awesome to come back to Apex, maybe on a limited time weapon or something, although now I say that, I do realise that EPG is kind of the Sonic Shout, and I cannot understate how fun this one is to use. And also, Respawn were working on an ability called Split Timeline, which essentially splits you into two different characters in two timelines. In these timelines, you can change your guns and it won't affect the other timeline, and it's very confusing because essentially you split Apex into two instances of the same game. This is how it works. I can keep teleporting between my two instances and do different things like pick up different guns, go to different areas, and keep teleporting between them. And once the ability runs out, whichever instance of yourself you're not playing with will die. How Respawn ever planned to put this one in game, I have no idea. They're essentially trying to put parallel universes in an Apex Battle Royale match, which would have not worked in my opinion. But honestly, this build is amazing. It's great to see what Respawn were working on before Apex was released, and how many future legends they were working on before they even got the game out. And it's awesome to see this early Octane model in its full form. But what do you think of this build now it allowed us to see all these abilities, how Respawn were testing them? And subscribe to keep updated with this type of thing.